left up in the
Very tightly shoved in there. Something happened to collapse at his house or something?
6:30, but I'll wait a
That
minute.
was a really odd laugh just now, Tom.
I know nothing.
All the staff are laughing.
I certainly don't think it's I didn't say it wasn't interesting. I said it was useful.
Well, should we wait for Pat, or we can get started? Okay. Well, I'd like to call this May 20th Planning Commission, Sedro-Woolley Planning Commission meeting to order at 6:31. Would you all please stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call. Commissioner Huggins. Not here yet. Commissioner DeVoynes?
Present.
Commissioner Freiberger?
Present.
Commissioner Fatisi is supposed to be online, but I don't see him yet. Commissioner Jasper?
Present.
Commissioner Fournette, present. And Commissioner Sexton called in, won't be here. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. When you had mentioned Joe's name, the remote attendee raised their hand, so I'm wondering if that's them. I'm gonna unmute them and see if that is him.
Oh,
So, guest, you will be unmuted. If you can state who you are, that'd be awesome.
Hey, Woody, this is Joe. Can you hear me?
I hear you
Yep,
now.
we can hear you.
Okay, well, now you can. You know, I logged in and I have no ability whatsoever to speak or change my screens. So are you controlling this, or do I have the ability to participate from my remote location? Because it's very frustrating, by the way.
I'll promote you to a panelist right now, and you should have more abilities.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. We'll watch for you if you have comments. Okay, so officially Joe Fatisi is here, present online. And consent agenda, did we all have a chance to read the minutes from April 15th?
Yes.
Any comments?
Yes.
I have one comment, and that is that 6 commissioners were present, and the vote for, hang on one second here, let me find my, sorry about this.
Yeah, I saw it too. I'm just looking. Oh,
Yeah,
right
it was
there.
just,
Bottom.
the vote, I believe, was off by 1. I tried looking back through the video to check if maybe somebody didn't vote, but I didn't, oh, yeah. Page 2, the very,
Bottom.
the motion there. So I believe the motion should have carried 6-0 unless somebody did not. This page.
It's my understanding the chair does not get a vote.
Oh,
Who, what?
The chair does not get
a vote. I
Oh.
could
Oh, really?
be misspeaking, but that's how council works, so.
Well, then I stand corrected.
Good catch, I saw it too, and I don't recall that before. What am I here for?
We'll take a look at the bylaws and double check that, but.
Okay. So that one's under investigation.
Nicole, I don't believe that's true. The chair votes, but if there's a tie, the chair does the tying vote. So over the years, whether it was myself, Eric, or Pat, or whatever, we've always voted for any motion that was brought up. So yeah, we might want to check into that, but I don't think that's accurate.
Thanks, Commissioner Fatisi, for
So
clarifying.
yes, Joe, your vote matters.
Okay, thank you.
I believe it does.
Okay. Anything else? Observations, comments? Should we go ahead and we'll entertain a motion to approve as written?
Also move.
Commissioner Freiberger approves the minutes. So I have a second.
Second.
Commissioner, oh, man.
It's
Jasper, sorry.
totally fine.
I keep thinking of your twin sister. Jasper, second set. Do we all in favor of accepting the minutes as written, say aye.
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 All opposed? Nay? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4 to 0, approve the minutes. Okay, moving on to general public comments. Please keep comments to 3 minutes or less because state law prohibits the use of city facilities for the purpose of supporting or opposing a campaign or ballot proposition. We respectfully request that public comment not make reference to such matters. Written comments will be accepted by letter or via email to nmcgowan@sedro-woolley.gov. Attention public comments until 4:30 p.m. the day before the meeting. So general public comments opens at 6:37. Do we have anybody here or online to say something? Nothing written?
Staff did not receive written comments.
No written comments?
No written comments.
Okay. So if there's no comments, then that general public comments is closed at 6:37. Public hearings? None. So on the agenda, you'll see that typically unfinished business comes next, but we're going to put new business ahead of it for tonight. We're going to talk about the comprehensive plan, Chapter 4, transportation element, and Mr. Bullock.
Let me just jump in real quick. So Bill Bullock is our Public Works Director, and he's going to give us a presentation on the draft element regarding transportation. This is something that he's been working on with our consultant firm. And this is, just for the record, this is your first reading of it. So, go ahead.
Okay. There's. No, it's on. I'm gonna hold it like this. It's easier. Okay, so this is first read the chapter 4, the transportation element. Next slide. There we go. Okay, so the transportation element, is basically this transportation element is a major update. This particular planning portion of the Growth Management Act actually includes some different major changes to the transportation element, mainly with active transportation adding into our concurrency management. But when we do this, we model and reflect what the transportation is going to be, capacity is going to be with our growth projections. And, and so with that requires modeling as well as updating our inventory of our sidewalks, roads, streets, and their functional classification. It's called the facilities inventory. It also includes traffic forecasts. We do a safety analysis, and then everything also is followed with a financial plan, both at the 6-year transportation improvement program level, and then we project 20 more years of forecasts of probable infrastructure improvements to handle that 20-year growth period. And this says here is a top to bottom refresh of the previous TE. So we review the goals and policies and the different elements of the last transportation element and update those things that have changed in that interim 10-year period. Next slide. So we start with the transportation system inventory. This picture up here is a picture of what's called the functional classification system. And this is the federal functional classification system that identifies as the state routes in red, the arterials, and the collector system. And this is a basis for the funding that's available to us, both state and federal funding for the improvements that will be proposed as we analyze this plan. It also contains an inventory of our freight and rail system. So the main freight system going through Sedro-Woolley is Cook Road, Highway 20, and Highway 9. And then everything else that's a collector arterial, it's local freight delivery, not inter-regional freight transportation as opposed to intra, which is inside the city. And then the other thing it also deals with is public transit. We have several public transit routes from Skagit Transit that run through our city. And then as a future forecast, we will also forecast where we're going to expand that transit service. In our town, we have the Jones-John Liner corridor project, which I believe everybody on the Planning Commission is familiar with. It's been an effort underway for the past several years. That will also result in expanded transit service, since it will be a major east-west arterial in the city when it gets connected. And then the other piece is the new piece I talked about, is what they're calling active transportation, which is just really the newest buzzword for multimodal transportation. But it does, the idea is that what you were doing is producing more and connected multimodal, both pedestrian, bicycle, as well as transit and all the different modes of travel. And now there's specific language in our GMA requirements that we include what they're calling active transportation. I keep saying multimodal because I'm old, but into our concurrency management. So right now, in the past, concurrency management has all been about single occupancy vehicle congestion. Okay, so level of service, if you're familiar with it, we grade our congestion A through F, just like kind of grade school grades. Our most urban level of service standards go up to level of service D, and E and F is unacceptable congestion. Well, now we have a component that assesses the pedestrian facilities and the bicycle facilities and their connectivity along with concurrency management. So development pays their fair share of improving those facilities as well. That didn't exist before. And so that's one of the big new pieces of the transportation element this go-round. Next slide. So existing traffic conditions, of course, is a big piece of this. So this town and many towns in Skagit County coordinate with the county. So we have about 15 years of annual traffic counts throughout the city. Mostly on arterials and our collector system. And that gives us the ability to more accurately forecast, develop trends for our traffic modeling, and gives us a good baseline rather than just taking counts in a single year. We have expanded those counts this year because this is part of the year we're upgrading the transportation element. But we have, with that analysis and that modeling, right now, in kind of the near-term forecast within the next 5 years, we have 4 main intersections, and usually in cities, it's the intersections that fail level of service well before segments. But we have Metcalf Street and Highway 20, Reed Street and Highway 20, and Township and John Liner Road on SR9 that are all approaching level of service E if they're not already there. And then the Cook Road, Trail Road intersection is level service D. So when you have the levels of service, so the gap between A and B, B and C are pretty small, but the difference between D and E is the largest gap. If you lined them all up, that would be the largest gap between C and D threshold and D and E threshold. Well, what you have on Cook Road and Trail Road is you're in the latter third of the D threshold, and so that's anticipated to approach level service E sooner than later on that particular road, just because Cook Road has a lot of traffic on it. So part of the message here is that we're not necessarily, two of these segments, the Trail Road and Cook Road and the Reed Street intersection, SR9 is a roundabout we're constructing this year. Construction starts on May 15th. And so we expect that to be mitigated by that project. But when the Jones-John Liner Road gets built, those other two intersections that show level of service E up there may very well change and improve, because now we have a major parallel route to Highway 20. So that will change how those are used than they are today. So what we'll do is we'll wait till we have about 3 years of traffic study after the Jones-John Liner Road is functional. And then we'll recheck that and then see how we have to plan and mitigate for it potentially. So, so the next bullet there about SCOG, they've basically already confirmed our existing streets and our level of service policy, so we're satisfying that GMA multimodal section right now. We just have to add in the last bit of the requirement that includes pedestrians and non-motorized transportation, which will happen in the next month or so. Next slide. So part of the existing traffic conditions and the safety performance is another analysis we do. So segueing a little bit away from this slide, one of the litmus tests for accidents and how you calculate that is either in terms of collisions per vehicle mile, millions of collisions per vehicle mile, or million collisions per vehicle trips. So at an intersection, you don't really travel miles, but you have so many trips entering that. So a high accident location or a high accident corridor is typically as much as 6 accidents per million vehicle miles. Average in this town is 0.3 accidents per million vehicle miles, which is not atypical of a city this size. So we're far lower than what your high accident location would be classified. The yellow areas are where we have our highest concentration accidents, and that's about at only 0.5 accidents per million vehicle trips. And to give you an idea of what that apples to apples is, if you have a road that has 3,000 cars a day on it, that's about 1 million vehicle trips in a year. Okay. And so that's probably something like South Township Road has about 3,000 cars a day on it. Okay. Whereas Highway 20 through town right now has about 12,000 cars a day. Okay, so to get a million collisions per vehicle mile, you would reach that in about half a year instead of once a year. Okay, so anyway, so that kind of sets a little bit of this tone so it doesn't look dire. This is actually a very low vehicle accident rate in town, even though I've identified we have 10 serious or fatal collisions in town over the last 4 years, and those are things that are often improved. SR9 and John Liner McGargle is one of those locations, and it should be mitigated quite a bit by the roundabout we're building this summer. So those are some examples of the collision rate, the kind of the safety rating we have in this town is actually very, very good. Next slide. Okay, travel demand forecasting. So this is the traffic model. So it's based, so your your forecasting model involves several different things. Mainly what it is in a very simplified fashion is that you have your road geometries that you have, including right turn lanes and left turn lanes and dedicated lanes, and road widths, and shoulder widths, and these different things that set the capacity of your road. Then you compare that to the actual travel on the road. Okay, and with that, And then we also base this model on, they call them traffic analysis zones, but basically are different, both housing as well as commercial areas have what you call a trip generation rate. So each one of those land use types generates a number of trips in the peak hour every day. So McDonald's with the drive, we have a manual for all these trip generation rates. And then we tie that with our land use, single family residence, whatever they are, and to give a predictive trip generation rate. We calibrate that with existing traffic counts in the area. And with that, we then begin to model and project what the future traffic will be given population growth. And what that does, what you see here is, again, LOS A and B are green. LOS C is green as well. LOSD on here is yellow. You have two intersections that are LOSD, and then the red is LOSE or F. So what we have here is every road segment is green. So it is either LOS A through C, and then we only have 5 intersections, right, that are operating at a level of service below C. So you have 2 that are D and 3 that are F, and 3 that are E. And one of those up at the upper right-hand corner is the McGargle SR9 roundabout location. So that will be mitigated this year. But this gives us an idea of what our transportation system will be operating for as far as congestion is concerned into the future. And then we'll also have a 20-year forecast that will overlay on that, and so you can compare where congestion is increasing, where it's increasing beyond an acceptable level, and then that helps direct our 6-year transportation improvement program to correct those deficiencies. It also allows us to understand what impacts larger scale development. I don't want to say large scale development, but larger scale development or particular businesses or developments are going to impact the system to calculate their traffic impact fees so they can pay their fair share. Questions? I am not done yet, but I figured this is technical, and I can talk about this for hours. I'm trying not to.
Well, let's see. How do you count cars nowadays? Because you used to have those rubber things across
We still have those rubber things across the road. So in the city now, since I've been here, we've purchased 2 of the what's called classification counters. And so now there is other types of traffic counters you can get that detect the magnetism of a car going over it, but they're less reliable. But our double tube counters that we have classify cars. So not only do the traffic count, but they can also tell the size of vehicle going over them and how fast it's going. And then we can get reports that show how many cars were going different speed. I call them 5-mile-an-hour speed bins. So each column will be starts at 15, but 15 to 20, 20 to 25, all the way up to 70 miles an hour. And then it will tell us how many cars were going that fast every hour of the day. And so that gives us a very good profile of what the driving behavior is. And then at the same time, it can also tell me whether there's cars, motorcycles, trucks with pulling trailers, UPS trucks, buses, all the way up to 3-train 18-wheelers, 18-wheel hauling vehicles. So we get a very good profile across the board, knowing what our average truck percentage is. We can even estimate the annual tonnage across the road, as well as the full picture of all the single occupancy vehicles, how fast they're going, when they're traveling, when their peaks are, that type of thing.
Well, that's a lot of information for a little rubber strip.
It's incredible.
Do you have those out right now somewhere? 'Cause
Not right now. We're generally using them right now for spot counts. So if there's like a speeding complaint or something like that, or a concern, we can then verify what the 85th percentile is, compare that with the speed limit. So generally, if you have a set of traffic counts that show your 85th percentile limit is within 5 miles an hour of the actual speed limit, that's excellent compliance. And between up to 10 miles an hour is acceptable compliance, although we'd like it better than beyond that. And then not only that, but I can develop trends. So if I have 4 really fast cars, going 45 down Township on Thursdays between 6 and 7 o'clock, I can coordinate with the police department, and they can manage their time to help with that behavior modification. I've done that for years. It's great. But nonetheless, lots of capability, but certainly we can measure that. We can't identify who went over, but we can identify when the largest number of cars is going over within a couple hour period of the day, and that actually helps a lot with that type of enforcement. But anyway, with that level of detail, we can model the roads rather accurately with the software we have now. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that's fascinating. I'm
Told you I
curious.
could talk about this for hours.
I love it. I am curious, since we're looking at the next 20 years, if you're looking at the UGAs at all, specifically the
Yes.
northern area. There's been a lot of accidents on Highway 9, just north of Bassett Road, and a lot of heavy vehicles coming through. So I was curious if that's part of your analysis as well.
Yes, we analyze actually even outside the UGA a bit, because UGAs tend to expand over time, and we want to be able to predict what type of level of service, both from a safety standpoint as well as a congestion standpoint, outside the city and inside the city.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next slide. There we go. Okay. So some of the other GMA requirements, we are courting both at a local basis as well as a regional basis and a state basis, even to a certain extent a federal basis. So one of the things my office does is every year is we report, remember I said these classification counters also give us truck sizes and how many trucks are traveling every hour that we have the trucks out, and we can predict the freight tonnage moving over any given road that we have the counters at on an annual basis. We actually report that to the federal government that then classifies our roads based on the amount of freight moving over them. And then there's dollars for improvement to making thicker roads to handle heavier freight and freight routes and that type of thing. So we coordinate both on a national and a regional level, mostly through SCOG as far as our Skagit County region. And SCOG is also the agency that kind of does a compliance check before all this goes to the state as well. There's kind of that clearinghouse for our county, so we can make sure we're checking all the boxes to meet the new GMA requirements. Sorry, I realized I didn't have this next to my mouth. And then that also includes tribes, transit agencies. We thankfully don't have any ferries in this city, but for instance, Guaymas Island Ferry is all part of the Skagit Island model, because that's a pretty significant part of their transportation system on the east side, or the west side, sorry. And then we also coordinate stuff with neighboring cities. So also the trip generation piece also includes what's called external to internal, internal to internal trips, and external to external, the people that travel through our city. So we also coordinate that to calculate what those are with the city of Burlington. Skagit County, because east of us is really a Skagit County effort. So all that stuff gets put into the model so we can properly forecast and then coordinate regionally and coordinate with the state. And then transportation demand management is not a lot of what we have in the city. So examples of transportation management that people interact with and know is when you see the variable message signs on I-5 that say, 22 minutes to Bellingham and 40 minutes to the border, and also how long the border waits are. Another transportation demand management technique is, you've seen further to the south on the freeway entrances where they have the stoplight that meters traffic as it flows on, so we don't clog the freeway all at once. Those are all transportation demand management. Some of these acronyms have changed over the years, so I stumble over myself a bit because I've been doing this for 30 years. But transportation demand management, those are ways to basically manage the flow of traffic by giving people superior information so that you don't create, the old S-curves, block-ups and stuff like that on 405 and that type of thing. So part of transportation demand management is park and rides, which we have a couple in this town, as well as ride shares and that type of thing. And transit is part of transportation demand management to an extent as well that it is. So those are just strategies to help control congestion and meter out congestion so it's not as bad. We're off the I-5 corridor, so we actually have less of those types of tools that we need to use to be effective with that. But Mount Vernon certainly has those. We're going to actually probably start putting some of those metering devices like on the College Way entrance and that exits and that type of thing, because they are starting to get, I don't know, if you've ever tried to go to Bellingham at about 4 o'clock through Mount Vernon, once you hit that bridge, you have this massive slowdown. So they need to start, they're right at that tipping point where they need to start metering out the traffic, and that's a traffic demand management strategy. But we don't have much need of that, but we do have to look at them and figure out what's reasonable for us to implement. Next slide. Okay, so our next steps. So one of the next pieces before we hit the second read of the transportation plan, and we're doing this right now, is we review all the goals and policies. And right about 80% of them are updated well enough that they emulate how we do business and how we maintain even our parks as well as our transportation system. This is focused on transportation, and make sure they align with Skagit Transit and we have that regional compatibility. But then we probably have 10 to 20% of those policies that probably need some tweaks or some updates. The one that needs the major update is concurrency management, because we have to add in our active transportation policy rather than just managing single occupancy peak hour trips, which is what the classic GMA has for years. So as we get through that, let's see, I got to read this a little bit. Our travel demand forecast, this is what I was talking about a little earlier, when we're going to project 10 years and 20 years into the future based on our anticipated growth and what our current traffic, that's why having that 15 years of traffic counts every single year helps, because it allows us to predict a trend of how our traffic is increasing, which is related to how housing is increasing, but not directly correlated. So it has its own trend. And then basically that then leads into all the different intersection and street level of service deficiencies. That's what I was talking about, that after we get the John Liner Railroad undercrossing done, so we have a functional parallel out Highway 20, after a few years we'll be able to recalibrate and see how effective that was in lowering those congestion problems at those 4 key intersections. I think that's my last slide. Nope. Sorry, this isn't my slide deck, but I know enough about this. I can talk about this stuff. So I've already talked a little bit about what our future transportation system needs will be, how we analyze that, figure out things for non-motorized, and then then the big thing is, again, confirming how much of an effect John Liner Arterial Trail Road Corridor mitigates the Highway 20 congestion. We actually may not know that until we get more development to the north, because right now the bulk of our city is developed to the south of John Liner Road. But as we grow into the future, really the main way we're going to grow is to the north, because we got the river to the south, and we got protected farmlands on the east and west. And when the growth starts occurring, like the Hanson annexation that just got passed a while, as those things develop more and more, could be 10, could be 20 years out for all we know. But John Liner Road, John Liner Road will make a bigger difference when those start to develop out more than they will in the immediate future. But we'll be able to manage that impact and see how well that benefited it. And then, sorry, I kind of read this a little bit, see what he's talking about. So this is all kind of the basic theme I've been talking about too. You start with your forecast, you figure out what things need to be mitigated, you try to balance that with development as it comes into traffic impact fees and whatnot. And then as you identify those key projects amongst other safety projects, most of our projects on the 6-year tip really are safety-based and multimodal-based more than they are congestion-based, because we just really don't have a lot of congestion in the city, although at times we do get backed up a little bit, but not to the levels where it triggers GMA dramatically. But we still need to monitor it, and we still want to create, the best level of congestion throughout the city so we don't get any hot spots. And then the other piece of that is balancing those costs with short range and long range planning that starts with a 6-year transportation improvement program, but also gives us that anticipated 20-year list, because we draw off that list to repopulate our 6-year tip as we complete projects and move forward with things. So I think that is the last slide, is it? Yep. Any questions I can ask beyond what you already have?
Well, I did wonder, since obviously the John Liner corridor is going to potentially improve those level of service E intersections, but even without that, is there like a limit on how long, like, you can have an intersection at that level before you have to improve it in some way?
Well, yeah, I'm going to answer that in a couple different ways. And so there is a little piece here with growth management, is that GMA, and I started with Mason County in 1993 with their first transportation element. One of the pieces is that WashDOT is exempt from a mandatory improvement when they hit level of service E. Okay, well, most of these are WashDOT intersections except for Cook and Trail Road. However, many cities will start to address those, so that's WashDOT mitigating their highway. We're secondary to WashDOT, but just like Jones, John Liner, McGargle, roundabout, we're paying for that, not WashDOT. So it's also not uncommon for cities to make sure they keep up with those improvements because they impact those cities specifically the most. And usually the majority of the traffic is on state routes. So rather than put themselves under an avalanche of improvements they can never keep up with, that's why they're exempt from the level of service E criteria. But we certainly will strive to do that. And the other piece is there's also a piece of the concurrency management I'm going to look at and see if it's easily enough addressed. But many times, the whole level of service at intersection failing is kind of complicated. Usually, only one or two turning movements are fail the level of service, especially if they're a right-hand turning movement that is dropping into E and the rest of it is a D. Right turn movements are usually rather minor and aren't really impacting the whole intersection, but they're on a side street that's being delayed a little bit too long. And so there's a group of policies we need to look at and refine on that to determine from an engineering basis whether or not it's truly impacting the intersection or whether it needs to be a few of those pieces. A left-hand turn movement can really impact an intersection, so that usually is what triggers, but not a right-hand turn movement. But many towns, including this one, say that that is a total failure of the intersection when it's not really. So that's something that needs to be considered. The other thing that I want to change with the transportation element is the concurrency policy and when it fails. So right now, most towns, very much like most towns, it's the straw that broke the camel's back theory, okay? So as long as you can be level service D in your traffic analysis, you're good. You don't have to do any special SEPA mitigations for traffic impacts or anything like that. And then the last development comes along and he has to pay the $1 million to fix the signal. Part of what I want to do is treat level of service D as the mitigation area. And then as projects come in, level of service D, they pay a fair share of the pipeline percentage because we know how many cars based on the road size and all that, that C threshold to D threshold is. We know how many vehicles that represents. And so if you're a developer that impacts 10% of that, we also have a pretty good idea how much that cost would be to mitigate that. Then they can pay that 10% fair share into that, into the reserve fund, and then they're done. And then after you get 3 or 4 of those that impacted, that's enough for a superior grant match and that type of thing, which then allows us to pay for and fix the intersection without a direct impact to city funds. So there's some of that we're going to be a little more advanced about, and we will walk the Planning Commission through that at the second hearing. But those are things that will help these folks up front who are in the planning department processing that development to have a better capability to meter out that fair share impact rather than just impact the very last guy. And many times that impact for the very last guy is so big they never develop because it's not worth it. So now you never get the improvement. And my goal is to have people pay their fair share but not get overly impacted individually. Make sense?
Thank you.
So that's going to be a big change in that.
I had a question on the materials, the packet materials, table number 2.
Okay, can you go back, Woody?
Yeah. No, not the slides.
Oh, not the slides?
The reading materials. The packet.
Oh, the packet. Okay, I don't have the packet in front of me. I'm sorry.
I just, page number 24.
24?
Yeah. Table 2.
24, table 2. Is this a policy or a table?
Table 2, Sedro-Woolley street capacity standards.
Okay, hold on.
And the file name was
Table 2 right here.
chapter
Okay.
4 of the chapter 4 of the
Real quick.
comprehensive plan. Yes.
Just to make sure, is that your table? Okay, thank you.
I apologize. I just had a hard time reading.
Oh,
that
no
table.
problem. I didn't print out this part of the packet before I came. I'm the stand-in from like 2 days ago, so I apologize.
And I maybe read it too fast. I just don't understand what I'm reading. I understand the first call, base, peak base,
Yeah,
base
peak hour
peak
capacity,
hours.
right.
But then after it said, for example, left turn lane for principal arterial 4 plus 450. I don't know what that number
Sure.
means.
So basically, the overall capacity of the road is, with this table, is talking about, is 900 vehicles in the peak hour. Okay, so that's usually between 5 and 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay, but for left turn lanes, that's 450 cars in the left turn lane in that peak hour. If you have more than that, you don't get enough left turns through, and you create congestion.
You're not
Okay.
adding to the plus.
Oh,
sign.
yeah, right, yeah. You're not adding, doesn't jump to 1,350
Okay.
for that thing, okay? And then access restrictions, capacity adjustment, I'm sorry, hold on, let me think here. Street parking, got it. Yes, you are adding 450. So if you have, so what this is saying is that if you have just a two-way road and somebody has to stop to take a left-hand turn and block the rest of the traffic until they complete that left-hand turn, that's a lower, your capacity for that road increases if you break out a separate left turn lane so they can leave the traveled way, not block traffic until they can make their left-hand turn. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so whereas if you have access restrictions, which meaning you're not allowing any driveways for that mile of road or whatever, you actually can put 630 more vehicles per hour through. And the idea there is that people slow down a lot to turn into their driveway, and if they're not doing that, it adds capacity to the overall road. Now, if you have no bike lane, they say you have minus 90 peak hours. The idea being is if you have, and this is only if you have bicycles traveling regularly and routinely on that road. If you just have a bike within the edge line or the fog line, that's going to make cars go slower to go around them and that type of stuff. So if you add a bike lane, that takes that out of the travel stream. If you have no sidewalks, so you have potentially pedestrians walking on the shoulder, that reduces the overall capacity of the road. So basically what you have is on the left-hand side of that table, you have things you can add to the road to allow more that don't require the through traffic to stop as often. And then things on the right-hand side of that table, bike lanes, no sidewalk, and street parking, reduce are obstacles, if you will, to through traffic. And so they reduce the capacity by a marginal amount. That make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, I had to kind of look at the table and interpret it till I realized what it was really saying. I've seen this table in different formats before. Any other questions? That was a very good question.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's your introduction to what we're trying to do with the transportation element.
Commissioner Fatizzi, you got anything?
No, I'm good. I always found that this particular portion, when we hear from city staff, especially on transportation, I'm just all ears. But good job, Bill. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
It is interesting stuff. Thank you, Bill. Good job. So from here, this will go to council for their first review of it, and then we may see it again later if there's additional comments that come back from council.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I guess I did have one follow-up thing, and that was just when I was reading the memo and kind of was the goals and policies in here are still being worked on, correct?
Yes.
So this is not their final form. I just wasn't sure kind of what was being proposed to be changed or not because of the format of this, and so.
We'll go through those in some amount of detail on the second read.
Okay.
But yeah, we're still developing those more complex policies, and we've gone through a first scrub of what existing policies still meet the standard and describe how we do. Really, our goals and policies describe how we do normal business within the Public Works Department.
Okay.
And so we've done that piece. Now we're tackling the newer stuff that's a little more difficult to make sure we get it right because no one's done it before.
Thank you.
Okay, and that being said, I will bring this back then for a second review with you guys. Yes, thank you.
So any further discussion on this? Okay, so I guess we can close this segment at 7:16. And move on to unfinished business, comprehensive plan, chapter 1, vision statement and introduction.
Okay. This is Tom again. So we have tonight for your second review, chapters 1 and chapter 3, vision statement and introduction, and then chapter 3 with housing. On the housing one, I suspect that maybe by now you do have some questions about that. I think last time was your first initial review of it. Council also had a review of it, as well as the vision statement and introduction. Council, I don't think they had any questions on that one really necessarily, but you've had it some time now too, and I thought we'd give you another chance to comment on that. So first off, chapter 1, if there's questions or comments, or Matt, if you wanted to add anything.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, commissioners. Thanks for having me here. Again, this is Matt Covert with Facet on the consulting team for the comp plan. So the one update I have from the council for the introduction and vision chapter is the desire to have I believe this came up in one of the meetings here as well, but a summary of public engagement section, and also a call out box that displays the kind of population projections and housing allocations information at a high level. That's already in the land use element, but they wanted to see like in the intro just like a call out box on the side that had that information, and then a short section with a header to containing a summary of the public engagement in the introduction and vision section. So those are the only two additional things that weren't in the draft that council saw that they wanted to make sure got added, and those will be added at a later date, but just wanted to bring that to your attention. Any further comments or thoughts on the format? I know that we talked about that a little bit last time. I think you all saw, if I remember correctly, a couple weeks ago, the first kind of look at the new format and had some comments and some things that were taken into consideration. Any additional thoughts on that? Nicole, how's the art coming along?
You guys actually might not know about that.
Oh, that's right.
Say what?
That was between that last meeting and this meeting, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. So I have proposed, a few of you may know that I specialize in charcoal art. So I'm going to be contributing an original piece for the comp plan cover.
Ooh.
Yeah, there was that kind of mountain like current photo, and then that like historical photo in that kind of purple tone kind of overlay, and Nicole was like, I think I could do one better than that. So
Yeah, so I kind of want to keep the theme a little on the historical side. So I'm playing around with some ideas and kind of have landed on like a circa 1930s image of downtown Sedro-Woolley during a log rodeo parade. Lots of festive things going on, and maybe riders on horseback kind of coming down, waving to the crowd, sort of thing. So I'd be happy to share some examples of things that I've done if you're curious. But yeah.
Wow. So are you like copying old photos, or is this all in your head?
Trust me, it's not in my head. Yeah, so in our adventures in the museum and some pictures that have been shared just throughout this whole process, I'm kind of compiling images together, and then
Nice.
it will be in my head, I guess, at that point, and then on the paper. But
That
yeah,
sounds great.
yeah, it's going to
Thank you.
be on sepia tone paper, so it'll kind of add a nice little kind of aged feel to it. If you do it right, it looks really nice.
I did have one comment, and I'm sure a lot of this stuff will get cleaned up during the final draft, but since it kind of jumped out at me on page 3 of the vision, statement 1, let me get there. Under that capital facilities element and public safety sub-element, I believe that should say this element, because it's just one element and a sub-element, or to be consistent with how the climate element and resilience sub-element is only referenced as one. So, just minor.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's a good catch. I think that probably dates from the time when there was still talk of potentially a public safety element being separate instead of a portion of the capital facilities work. So that's a good catch.
I have a question, but I have to find it on here. Anybody else formulating anything? Okay, I think I found it, but if it doesn't make sense, I'll keep looking. So on page 4, that's written on the page, or page 5 if you're going by the PDFs, left column halfway down, it says why the city of Sedro-Woolley is planning. Okay, it says the Growth Management Act was intentionally drafted to give significant decision-making power to local jurisdictions. Although the act tells jurisdictions that they must identify concerns and goals of the community, prioritize these goals, and plan how these goals will be achieved, it does not dictate the solutions. And I had to read that several times because quite often we talk about in here how everything's dictated to us, how we have to follow whatever comes out of Olympia. And do we actually have a mind of our own here?
It's a reasonable question. I think the overall trend has been to they've sort of moved slowly away from deference and more toward saying specifically what you can and can't do. Although there is still some latitude. I think like a perfect example of this was in I think it was 2019. They said they passed a law that said, hey, you can get funding to do a housing action plan, and you can come up with some cool ideas that fit your city. And then a lot of cities did that, and got a grant and did a study and did some code changes. And then 2 years later, they said, actually, we're going to set statewide standards for that specific code, and so the work that you did, you're going to have to redo to comply with what we think it should be. So there are several cases where like that, where they've gone from more permissive to much more prescriptive, but there is still latitude. For example, some of the housing work that came out of the last couple bills, and I'm using housing because that's the bills that I'm most familiar with, but they said that you can't have like you can't this was for the middle housing, so not this isn't something that necessarily applies to Sedro-Woolley, but for the middle housing bill, they said, okay, so you can have design review for middle housing, but it has to be administrative, so not a design review board. And it basically has to meet like quasi-judicial standards of being clear and objective and not arbitrary. So there is still, they don't say like, this is what you have to do in your design regulations. They say like you can do it, but it has to be administrative and it can't be arbitrary and unnecessarily complicated. And so then communities have a lot of latitude within that to decide what that is for their community. So yes, it has gotten more specific over time what you can and can't do, but there is still some latitude. I mean, the legislature, they don't tend to take things away from the GMA, they just add. So I'm sure there'll be more things over the years, but that's sort of where we're at right now, is that it's moved away from substantial local deference, but not, there is still some local deference. Tom, do you have something to add there too?
I think we hear you, and we have seen those changes. What we try to do, though, is still put as much deference on the local community to work hard to find that perfect balance where we do have our community values, things we'd like to see happen, and make that line up with the state. So I prefer to take that approach, really, start with the community first, and then check to see how it lines up with state requirements versus the other way around. And I hope that's what we're accomplishing here. So let's see what we want to put down. Let's put it down, and then let's compare and see if we can make that go.
Okay.
Yeah. Message heard.
Fair point.
Thank you. As I was reading through it, I was taking lots of notes because I didn't understand probably half of what I was reading. I know this is called a comprehensive plan. I couldn't comprehend half of it, so I'm kind of slow as I'm going through my notes here. Apologize.
No problem.
No, I put my hand up. Woody, is this the way you want to handle it? If I have something to say remotely or?
Yeah, that's
Just
perfect.
interrupt
You're,
when I'm
you're up,
doing that.
Commissioner Fatizzi.
So I have a question. Hey, Tom, you did a really good job on the, calling it your community, the weekly update. So on the one that has the housing elements, are you comparing the, like the 2025 legislative update, Department of Commerce? We have a whole lot of housing and transportation, Senate and South, House and Senate bills. are you comparing or just taking a glance at what these are? And to make sure that what we're putting in place now with the comp plan update is consistent with the language that we're seeing coming out of the state. And I understand that there's a lot of things that don't apply because it is population-based. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's why I put that in there, is that we get these updates from our planning organizations, and that came out in the last one. I was a bit surprised by how many there were, and I haven't had a
Yeah,
chance to
yeah.
circle back with Facet yet on that. I know they're keeping track too. So at some point, what I want to do, and soon, is sit down and have that conversation with them to make sure that we're not running astray from any requirements that come out of that. It's still being digested, though, at the organizations level, at the Washington APA level. And their next newsletter, they promised to take that list and highlight some of the most important parts of that in terms of requirements for cities. So, yeah, that's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's why I put that in there. I want to make sure that, oh, wow, here's this whole new list of stuff. Let's make sure that we don't adopt our plan without addressing these if we're required to address these.
Yeah, that recognition alone and being on our screen, okay, I think is just as important that we recognize that there's some other potential legislative issues that might come through to affect what we put together. So having a little heads up on it, like we've done with different past things we've worked on over the years. So yeah, thank you. I think that's
Yeah. I'm just grateful
just
they only meet once a year.
right. Just understanding that it's out there. You know that's half of the battle is recognizing it. Right. Thank you.
While the chair is looking for his, just a really minor thing since I noticed it. Page 17, so the second to the last page there. Let me get back to there. Well, I had it. Actually, 18, the very last page. I know that these are going to be broken up, these individual sections, and put in the various chapters. But under library, since this was not corrected, that first sentence, the Sedro-Woolley library system is enjoyed by a wide variety of residents and non-residents who benefit from the facility's modern technological resources. Versus modem, because spell check won't catch that.
That's a funny typo. Yeah, is that actually a typo, or is that just some of your previous plans? Some of the letters were squished.
When you zoom in, it looks like an M.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I think it is an M. Yeah, it is. All right, thank you for zooming in. Yep. That's a funny holdover typo from 2015. That's we will definitely correct that. Good catch.
No, I'm on. So on page 12 of the ditto, or 13 of the PDF, it's E 3.7. It says policy E 3.7 under encourage productive forest agriculture, blah, blah, blah. So
Land use element?
it's kind of a minor thing, but I just need some clarification. It's not quite up there yet. It might be, yeah, it's further down. You should scroll up, Woody. Or scroll the other way, sorry. Scroll down. Right there, E37. It says Sedro-Woolley's tourism strategy should also capitalize upon the city's unique location and timber industry heritage, strive to maintain a balance between the logging history and environmental education and preservation. Yet, we took all those words out of our vision statement because we didn't want to be recognized as logging and timber. And so I just got confused when I read that. And I went back and read the vision statement again, and we took those words out.
Yep, thank you.
So do we capitalize or non-capitalize? And then while we're at it, right near it is OS2. Oh, maybe it's not real near it. Wherever OS2 is. Oh, I'll read it off there. Recognize and promote benefits of agricultural land, which include maintaining open space, establishing rural character, preserving view corridors, enhancing wildlife habitat, and providing employment for the residents of Skagit County. I love that. But it seems like in our housing segment, we have to have 3 ADUs per lot and build skyscrapers and squeeze everybody in. It's the opposite of that. And so I don't know, every once in a while something would stick out like, this is the opposite of what I've been hearing. So pardon my confusion.
Yeah, that's interesting. What can you zoom out a little bit so I can kind of see where this is at in the document, Woody? So are we at, okay, page 12. Okay. Yeah, I mean, clearly that's a nod to the kind of the other, kind of the main goal of the GMA, which is protecting agricultural land. That's was why it was passed in the first place. You know, it's one of those things where, like, the city doesn't really have a lot of control over, like, promoting the benefits of agricultural land. But the verbiage is pretty vague. You know, recognize and promote could mean a lot of things, and it certainly doesn't mean regulate, because the city doesn't really have the authority to regulate agricultural land. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, Tom. I'd be open to taking this one out, but we can talk about this next week.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I like the idea of keeping it in, but perhaps there's some way to transpose this idea into the housing.
Tom, please speak into the mic.
I like the idea of keeping it in there, but maybe there's a way to transpose some of that language, or at least the idea, into the housing part too, to get at your point of, you know, we're still a small community surrounded by ag land and so forth, so that's the way I'd suggest that we look at that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to see it stay in, but just the emphasis has been the opposite for quite a while, so I was relieved to see it. Yeah. Anyway, I could go on and on, but we'll see how it all shakes out. Because this is just a draft, and you got more to go, so
Yes,
more
we do.
rearranging, yeah. Anyone else?
You know, I'm just gonna add in on that ag land. It's predominantly in the unincorporated Skagit County portion on our borders. If you actually drive around town, I don't really know how much ag land we actually have that's being actively farmed. Most of our stuff is the surrounding areas, specifically, I want to say to our west. But keeping that balance in there, that it's important to us, yeah, I'm totally in favor of keeping that language someplace. Just my 2 cents.
It's good.
Thank you, Commissioner. Feels like we might be in a spot to move on to the housing element. If maybe give another 30 seconds here for if anybody has any other burning thoughts on intro and vision.
Anyone? Okay, should we move on to, we'll close the, if there's no other comments. Commissioner Fatisi, mind if we move on?
Yes, I'm in favor of that.
Okay, so we'll close Chapter 1 Vision Statement Introduction at 7:40 and move on to Comprehensive Plan, Chapter 3, Housing Element.
Okay, so same introduction. Basically, this is second chance to take a look at it, and if there's questions that you've had since you looked at it the first time, please let us know, or anything that pops into your head right now as you're looking at it, please let us know. Unless, Matt, there's other things you want to add to that.
Well, there were three comments that the city council had that I wanted to make sure we brought up. One was related to, they wanted us to kind of tweak the language. We had put some language in there on kind of recognizing if the cottage housing ordinance is adopted, kind of recognizing its role in the housing element. There's a couple places where we talked about it, and they wanted us to take another look at that language. I think Nicole and Tom and Ashton, if my memory and notes serve me correctly, to just make sure that they're not being that the city isn't being kind of put in a corner of having to do certain things or wanting to maintain some flexibility in that and where and where it's used. And so just wanted to highlight that. Nicole, I don't know if you had any other comments on that, since that's your ordinance that you're working on.
I think if I could just jump in, I think what their concern was putting down something that in a policy that's very specific about a certain kind of housing that would then seem to obligate us to pursuing that when we haven't had that discussion yet with council.
Yeah, and I think the since it's a draft, I would recommend keep, because we also did the same thing with ADUs. There were a couple places where we talk about ADUs, specifically like the pre-approved plans and things like that. That these drafts are always subject to change until adoption, and if council ends up going a different direction on the cottage stuff, that could get removed or altered, or so certainly we have that flexibility. I don't know if anything needs to change right now, but they did want to make sure that we kind of held off on committing them to anything until the ink is dry, so to speak. Two other things. One was ensure that MFTE is not included, since they were not supportive of that, and it's not, but they just wanted to make sure that we took another look and made sure that we weren't signing them up for that. I think in the context of the discussion of incentives, they said, well, we just want to make sure we're not talking about MFTE as an incentive, because we didn't want to do that. So took another look, and I think we're good. And then the third one, and in addition to any further input you all may have on the draft element, this may be a good opportunity for you to weigh in as well. They wanted us to look at some potential additional measures to protect manufactured home parks. So we had some language in there about exploring some sort of zoning tool, like an overlay or a district or something, to protect existing manufactured home parks. And any that may be brought into the city in the future through annexation. And council wanted us to take another look at any additional measures that could be used to protect manufactured home parks as a source of existing naturally occurring affordable housing. Examples included that the council gave included providing notification of when a manufactured home park goes on the market, and supporting resident efforts, within that manufactured home park who want to band together to purchase the land underneath the park. And so the support for that could include something like assisting the residents with a grant application or something like that, or or submitting for a grant application for some sort of utilities work that would be necessary to make that happen, or something like that. So they gave a couple of examples, and we were curious if commissioners had any other thoughts on what we could do to protect manufactured home parks.
Just for some context for the commissioners, one example that I'm familiar with that City of Bellingham uses is when in a recent comprehensive plan update, not the most recent one, they established I believe it was a 50-year moratorium on developing parcels where a mobile home park was. So they designated a zoning overlay on top of existing mobile home parks, and then put that 50-year limit from altering the mobile home park.
Ashton, I have a question on that. Why would that need to be in an overlay? I mean, I just thought.
I don't know why it would need to be in an overlay. I just know from my experience at Western using their, the City of Bellingham's website and their zoning tools, it was a complete overlay zone.
For just putting a moratorium.
I don't know if it was only a moratorium. I do know a
I was
moratorium
going to
was
say, no, it would
included
have
in
to
that
be
overlay
something else
zone.
on top of that. That would have been in addition to it. But we could put it in the code straight, and that's just one example of something.
So I believe when I was reading through this, oh, Commissioner, I didn't cut you off, did I?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
I saw something in there about, I want to say it was down in the action items, right of first refusal. So it looked to me like you had already put in some language for that. But I think that's interesting, pretty effective if you put a moratorium on.
Yeah, that's the probably the bluntest, most effective tool.
I think to I think it's important to keep into perspective here that what we're setting out is broad policies and goals for what we'd like to see. I don't think what is necessary, and I think kind of what council was getting at is we don't have to necessarily list the different kinds of tools that we would want to employ to meet those goals or align with those policies. Understanding that those would come later when we update our zoning code or look at programs to adopt to get there. So if we're talking moratoriums or MFTE or cottage house or whatever, what we're looking at is policies that would support alternative ideas for meeting the affordable housing need, if you will, and others.
Yeah, this might be a case, Tom, where having more specific action items, maybe you don't want a lot of specific action items on something like this because there's a lot of other potential things you could do, and you don't want to necessarily get yourself down a road of like, oh, the plan says we have to use this tool when there could be 3 other things that we haven't considered. So this might be a case where more specific actions aren't necessarily helpful.
Yeah, I would think that would. I think you're right, and I think that would cause us to slow down on our progress toward getting the comprehensive plan adopted. It might mire it down unnecessarily when those types of discussions could come later after adoption.
So on that note, as I was reading through the goals and policies again, and then the action items, I was thinking about basically that thing is, are we, well, the practicality, this was already kind of built into this element, but trying to extrapolate that same setup to the other elements, we're kind of short on time. And then if you are too specific, I mean, that's what code is for, to get more specifics. I kind of wonder if maybe, just thinking about what Matt had, I believe, had mentioned about, referring back to the specific policies that the action items are kind of providing a specific action for. I wonder if maybe it's doing too much here, but I mean, it did seem at the last meeting that it provided some good direction for staff at the same time, and I just wondered how staff felt about that, if there was a change of thought in that regard. Because I can see it both ways, but.
Yeah, I think some of the ideas that we are considering to meet our goals are new ideas, and we've not had a chance really to kind of flesh them out as how they could apply here to Sedro. I think that's some of the feedback that we're also getting from the council, is some concern about pursuing something that we really haven't spent time hashing out. That said, I think I'd like to see the action items be broad enough that they would support some of the ideas and action items that council would like to pursue at some point, without having to go back and adjust the comp plan to support a code amendment. So it's kind of a fine balance there. In a perfect world, it would be balanced, and we would have that policy written generally enough that we could say, well, this new idea that we're proposing, a code amendment, whatever, is supported by the comprehensive plan in this action item here. You can make that argument. Sort of a safety net.
Well, what I found myself doing is going through them. I just kept asking myself, why are we calling this out specifically and not having it as just part of the policy kind of question? And that came up a number of times. And so, and if council is also concerned about limiting, putting ourselves in a bit of a bind when we haven't fully considered all the potential options, we don't want to limit ourselves in a policy document like this. So, I mean, I think it's a great idea, and I'm not necessarily against it, but, well, possibly some of these things will come up. I don't want to hog the conversation here. I have a list, so, okay. Get to. So I am looking at the individual document here, and I know that it's the full packet up on the page there, so hopefully we can find where everything is.
What is it you're looking for?
Okay, I'm just gonna go down to the goals, policies, and action it's page 19 in the individual document, but, okay, you have it, all right. So, since we are renaming this as goals, policies, and actions, that first paragraph, that first sentence still has strategies in there, so we can fix that. I'm getting that.
At the very top, yes.
Okay. And then, I'm sorry, I may be skipping around a little bit, but down on sorry, the page numbers. Policy H 2.2. So I noticed that further up, we had taken out the explanation of housing for special needs because it seems to have changed. We're kind of redefining it differently. So I was just wondering if we should also take it out here.
That clause,
Yes.
in the parenthetical clause?
Yeah, the including but not limited to.
I think that would make sense. Yeah, just because it's expanded so much to include, like group homes and transitional housing and things like that. The list in the GMA is long, and so having the "but not limited to" clause in there doesn't really help all that much.
Well, and further up, when we were talking about programs, it was that same language was specifically taken out because it had kind of been redefined, and I'm sorry, I did not write down that page.
That's a good catch. I remember what you're talking about. Thank you.
Then in H 3.1, so I was looking at your comments in the sidebar there, and let me take a look here. So I kind of wanted to ask for some clarification on your note there, because you said that you added where feasible to that require a usable outdoor recreation space as part of all residential developments where feasible, so that we're not boxing ourselves in here. But you said there should be some thinking given to not requiring under a certain unit count. So are you, in your opinion, are you thinking to add something to that specific policy there, or?
That was more to explain my rationale.
Okay.
For the commission and the council. I think that where feasible is a useful clause because it leaves the exact mechanism open. I think like the thing that was in my head was in cases when you have like an open space requirement for all multifamily projects, even really small ones, you have a situation where you've got like 3 units, like a triplex, and they have to have an outdoor recreation space, and the standard that you get based on the unit count is like 87 square feet or something, and you're like, this isn't actually doing anything all that helpful. So I've seen cases where you have like projects over 10 units have to have a outdoor space and it's minimum of X square feet or whatever. So the where feasible is just like, leaves a little bit of wiggle room. The comment was just me kind of explaining why for the benefit of decision makers.
Okay. Yeah, because if we get too specific there, then we're running into that issue of overreaching potentially.
I love where feasible. That's a great clause.
I do want to make mention, in our current zoning code, we do have a clause in there that for subdivisions of 7 units or more, you're required to put in 8,000 square feet of usable open space. I don't recall the unit count for multifamily, but there is a minimum unit count trigger for that, so it's not for all development per se. Like shore plats, you'll never get an open space requirement.
So this would be a case where the plan is actually being brought into compliance with the code, because the code, I think, is already kind of, is more up to date as far as those best practices are concerned.
And then policy H3.6, since it seems to be referencing our cluster regulations, unless I misread it here, cottage clusters, it only lists the R7 and R5, but those are also allowed in the R15. So we could add that in there
Sure.
so that it's consistent with the regulations, unless something else was being envisioned in that particular policy.
I suspect that is the precursor terminology to what's become the cottage ordinance, because it's separate from the PRDs, which are the next policy. So they're clearly very distinct things.
H4.4. Explore the adoption of a citywide incentive program for residential maintenance. This seems kind of redundant with H1.5. So I was just trying to get a sense of, seems to me that possibly H1.5, which says require a usable outdoor recreation space as part of all residential developments. Oh, no, that's not.
That's not
That's the wrong one. I'm sorry.
That's
I might be swapping my numbers there. Hang on.
the point. Woody, can you scroll back up to the policies under goal H1?
Did I read it wrong here?
There we go. Yeah.
It's very similar wording, and I hope I grabbed the right one there.
Yeah, it is very similar. I think this one says incentive based, and the other one does not, I believe.
Yeah.
And this one says home improvement rather than home maintenance, which there are some fine distinctions there.
Okay.
But I can see where that is maybe talking about the same thing, and it was kind of planning by committee, where like two people have an idea and it ends up in two different places. I think if it is the same idea, then we should probably figure out which is the right home for it, like which goal is it kind of most fully implementing. But if they are distinct, which is also a possibility, then they should be made more distinct.
I feel if they are similar enough to be basically the same, that it fits better under H1, just because it's talking about to provide sound, adequate housing for all current and future Sedro-Woolley residents versus H4, which is conserve the social characteristics. It's not, it specifically says social rather than other aspects of a neighborhood. So, but that was just my thoughts, and I kind of wanted to see what other thoughts might be on that.
Yeah, it's a good catch. Commissioners, any thoughts about that?
Matt, Joe here.
Yes.
I'm confused about social characteristics in general of existing residential development. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that social characteristics? I mean, as I roll around this town, everybody has a whole separate idea of what their own social characteristics are. Just take a walk down Jameson Street from the I-9 roundabout to the end of town and just look around you. So exactly what are we talking about? Social characteristics of existing residential development. Help me out here.
Well, I think you've hit on a really good question. So I left that terminology alone uh, in the uh, in the draft because it seemed like an intentional word that it didn't trigger uh, the word that always like catches my attention is when you talk about like uh, rural character or single family character, which is terms that sometimes show up, and your plan does not do that, but it did have this term social characteristics. So I left it. I didn't leave a comment on it, but it did kind of strike me that there may be a story there. I would read social characteristics of existing residential development as basically acknowledging that the physical form and the kind of social interactions that result are related. Um, but I think that's definitely open for debate. And so Commissioner Fatisi, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this since you've been around in this planning environment for a while, and I don't know if you were there when that language was drafted, but you may have a story there.
Yeah, I should have questioned it then. Like I said, living here for quite some time now, every neighborhood is a little bit different. And a lot of times people don't get along. Okay. Where I had a neighbor that decided to burn everything 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that I wasn't directly next to the property, but the one neighbor was not on board with that. And so I'm just trying to wrap my head around social characteristics, because now when we take a look at what we need to deploy in the code with ADUs, you can have a lot of things change going forward just on the ability to increase the densities and what was predominantly a single family zone, whether they were R5s or sevens, and they're now going to become something very, very different. So to define that or have a better idea of what exactly it is we're trying to frame here, I think it's just worth a little bit more further discussion, not just for myself, but to everybody else that sits on this commission. I'd also be interested in what some of the council members think about that particular term. Anyway, I'm just throwing it out there. Like I said, this is a draft, but it's a great start. So, and this is really good discussion to have at this point in time.
Perhaps changing that to neighborhood character, because I do believe we've already used that term wasn't it in the vision statement itself? So it would be referencing back to that.
Right, and consistency in that language amongst the different elements. Agree.
And neighborhood keeps it open enough to acknowledge all these other things like the ADUs and the PRD and all these things that to where R5 doesn't mean 5 single family homes per acre and that's it, which could be construed currently. So
Yeah, we're not being overly specific with that type of
Yeah.
framing that in that manner. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple more things. H 5.1, here's where I was getting a little bit thinking, kind of rethinking about action items and what that purpose was, because looking at your suggestions here, Matt, for exploring an administrative design review process in the residential land use designations through a participatory design process with community residents. I like that we're forward thinking and anticipating what's going to happen at the state level on this, but if there is a way to break this up, because how this reads to me is that it is, administrative is done by staff. Participatory design review process is community, and we're trying to avoid the design review board concept here. So I'm wondering if, and I wasn't quite sure what the purpose was, and I think you had pulled that part up from a different policy and kind of combined it because they were similar. Possibly the participatory process is this process right now of the comp plan update. So I was trying to think of a way to reflect that there, because the policy as it's written right now seems to, it's a little bit misleading that the administrative design review would be somehow a participatory public process, which is counter to what administrative design review is.
That's very interesting. That wasn't how I read it when I read that language, but the fact that we had like a totally different reaction to it maybe hints that it's not super clear. Yeah, my thought, when I read that other policy that I wrapped into this one because it was so similar, I was imagining that it was the process of coming up with the design standards was a like public process, which would be done through like a code amendment, but that the actual review process for applications would be administrative. But I can see how this might not be clear on that, because is that this comp plan? Is it just the code amendment process? And if it's the latter, then that last clause doesn't even need to be in there, right? So, because that's how it would be done anyway. We do an administrative design review process by doing a code project.
Well,
So,
I mean, I do believe it is important to reiterate and remind the public that we do value public input and everything. So I was trying to think of like wording that could still leave that in there, but possibly if, just throwing out a couple of options here, explore implementing an administrative design review process through, but then it almost sounds redundant, through a participatory design process. So then you get kind of into this circular sounding language, or maybe develop an administrative design review process with public input, something like that.
sure. Yeah, I like that.
Hey, let me ask this question on that, because I was a little confused. Are we talking about a specific project? In essence, we already have a pre-application meeting for any resident that wants to do whatever type of project. That not only are we looking at the land use code, but design guidelines and everything right down to utility hookup. Is that what we're talking about here, or are we talking about what's going on right this second? See, there is a process for the public to get involved, and that's what hearings are all about. That's what showing up to a planning commission meeting is all about, and getting on the record and being part of the whole overall thing. So it's already in place. The thing is, a lot of folks just don't take the opportunity to involve themselves at the times when it is published, when it's on an agenda, for them to be very, very specific to get their ideas and to be heard. So are we just reiterating what we're doing now, or is this something a little bit different, as in more specificity to a particular project? That's I guess my question here.
Yeah, honestly, I do think that this kind of is reiterating something we already do. We have our design standards and guidelines manual, and that's
Yeah,
all
we
an
have a pre-app
administrative
meeting that you can
process
sit
that
back and, yeah,
the applicants are well aware of when they go through their pre-application meetings. It's
Yeah,
something I
sure.
tell them that will be a standard that applies. And it's all reviewed administratively, with the exception of the public zoning. They're in the design standards and guidelines manual, is a statement in there that all public zoned projects do need to go through a design review committee. And I look at that and I'm like, well, I guess that's me. So,
Right.
yeah. So I guess this is one we're already doing. Not sure what to do with that from there.
So as an example, a public zone project, would that have been like the library, right? Would that be an example of what we're looking at of a public project that,
Yeah, public zoning, there's a lot of things that fall under that category. I believe the library, is it one of them? Probably. But think about like schools or parks or city hall, things like that.
So I apologize. It was my assumption there that we had something in place that was going to have to be modified or go away. But if we already have it administratively, but to that point then on public zoning, was your point being that the state is eventually going to say it goes away for everything, design, just any sort of outside put
This
on
is
design
this is
review?
sort of linked to the I think I said this in my comments about the state has already said that for middle housing types you can't have design standards that are more stringent than what you have for single family homes, and whatever design standards you do have to be reviewed administratively.
Okay.
So this is more of a, like, as you're developing code for new things, whether it's cottages or unit lot subdivisions or whatever else comes down the pike, that process, that administrative process is kept, rather than having it go through the design committee that may or may not exist or might just be Nicole. So so it's kind of trying to future-proof that a little bit.
So maybe, might I suggest instead of the word explore or develop or anything like that, just something that ensures that we're continuing to do that? Ensure. It's a good word.
Or we could just strike it out if it doesn't seem relevant.
I kind of like it, but I think it might be a little clumsy right now, for lack of a better word. Maybe if we could park that and have an internal discussion about it. See if we can root that out a little better.
I'm open to that, yeah. I just want a quick point before we move on is, though, if we decided to take it out now and say we make code changes and things like that, where maybe we're affecting residential development code, and think to jerry-rig something up where there, again, is a design review committee, and it just gets messy. So it's good to have something in here to refer back to, like, okay, we want to make sure we're maintaining an administrative design review when we're thinking through these code changes in the future. Just want to put that out there.
That makes sense.
Good, yeah.
H5.5, this one was one, so encourage the development of diverse housing for a variety of families throughout the community. And for I guess, encourage how? I feel like we've already talked about this a number of times in other places. And so it just felt very, like, too vague.
Yeah, I think that's a good catch. That does feel duplicative. There was, I think, under the either goal 3 or goal 4, there's a couple of policies related to this. This is that, all economic segments, and plus I think households is probably the term you want to use rather than families, because that's just one type of household. I mean, there's certainly value in saying that you want to have housing that's appropriate for families. I mean, I think the plan does say that elsewhere. But this is very similar to those other policies that talk about the wide range of housing types, all economic segments, everybody in the community, blah, blah, blah. So that's a good catch. do other folks feel the same way about that one? Is there any concern with rolling that one into one of the other ones? I think, Woody, if you can go back up to, I guess let's start with, I can't remember whether it's goal 3 or goal 4. Start with goal 3. Benefit social well-being. Let's see. No, it's not. 4. Oh, maybe it was 2, actually. Sorry, I'm going to make you scroll everywhere throughout the document. Here we go. Yeah, this is the one with a lot of this. A lot of the. Yeah.
Well, H 2.9, for
0.9.
example,
Yeah.
has more specific way to achieve that.
Yeah, that's like the more specific policy language type language version of it, which is that since we already have, there's already a lot of like, you know, housing for people making over median is generally considered, as long as you have zoning that allows single family, which you obviously do, that you're good there. So this would be the more specific version.
So I'm gonna throw this out there, and I've brought this up before, and I've just seen it in other jurisdictions, and it's more to be, there's different household compositions, right? We've used historically the word family to describe residential uses. Do we want to start tweaking our language when we're talking about residential household composition to be more general, because different people have different ideas of what a family is? And I think we're specifically talking about residential uses, and leave it up to whoever is going to be inhabiting that particular place of what they want to refer to themselves as. And let's face it, we've just seen a lot of, in my opinion, very weird kind of things. But you know, at the end of the day, it's like what makes somebody a family versus somebody else if they have a totally different idea of how they want to live. I just think it's just it's kind of pigeonholing us into a place that at some point I think we're going to see some kind of language from a bigger power that all that language statewide needs to be modified. It just wouldn't surprise me. But do we want to take a look at that right now? Because we're talking about residential uses. And when it comes to the actual composition of a household, you know, that's a real private matter, in my opinion. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not being a fly in the ointment, so to speak, but it's something I've noticed and I've seen in, like I said, other jurisdictions, that a lot of that terminology is being removed and it's just being referred to as residential use. So just some thoughts, that's all.
Good points.
And I am personally a family guy. Okay. However, when it comes to government, okay, and how we refer to things these days, I got to tell you, it's a slippery slope at best.
Trying to catch all, and instead of leaving it broad enough that it covers all.
I do, but I'm kind of hogging the discussion here.
Like you could do single unit development instead of single family. You know, there's just words around it that are just more general and potentially more consistent with what you're really trying to accomplish, you know, moving forward. Like I said, as history moves on, different things have changed over time. Matt, what have you seen in other jurisdictions on that note?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. So I have also seen a lot of cases. I've actually worked on codes that do this, where oftentimes you'll have like a definition of a definition of family and a definition of household, and those two definitions aren't the same. And so typically, when I've been working with jurisdictions, we've just changed it to just define households and have it not be like there's a lot of kind of old legacy language from the earlier days of planning that say like a family is not more than 5 unrelated people living in a
Right, right,
in
right.
a
That's my point.
structure or something,
Exactly. Yeah,
and so I've typically tried to steer communities away from that in their code. That said, I think there is still value in a policy document and saying something like ensure there's housing that's suitable for families, so because that's not exclusive of also saying that that all households of all types should have an option within your community. So I think there's definitions wise when you really get into the language. I think there's strong reason to kind of make it as open ended as possible. But I think it still can be helpful whether you want to think of it as just it's not even really political. It's just kind of social, right? It's like people still say, oh, we still value having family housing, and that's okay to say in a policy document as long as it's not being exclusive. That's probably how I would see it.
that's why I asked.
Yeah, it's a good question. Commissioner Freiberger, are you out of policy items or?
I am out of policy items, but not actions.
For now.
So, so going down to actions, below those first 4, 5 struck out, or mostly struck out paragraphs there, when you get to encourage small-scale multifamily 4 units or less within existing single-family neighborhoods. Such structures should be designed to complement existing neighborhoods. I guess for an action item, it felt, I was trying to figure out how we would encourage that, and maybe we don't need to get more specific here, but it's so specific but vague.
Yeah, so here was a case where other than my grammatical edit, this one I think actually kind of plays nicely with the recent changes to GMA, and it's basically what you did in your PRD.
Okay.
And I think the reason why I left it in is because I think if we're talking about potentially looking at like a density incentive for affordability, that this idea of like being designed to complement existing neighborhoods, I think it's not super specific, and maybe it could get more specific, but it's talking about that, the gold standard of like what you would think of as middle housing, which is in many cases multifamily of 4 units or less, attached townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, those are already allowed in your PRD, and the gold standard is that they are, when you look at them from a distance, kind of hard to distinguish from the single family that they're next to. And so that was kind of I think this is like, it was like, oh, this is kind of gets at that idea. It is also not very specific, and so I have, now that you've been talking about like actions versus policies, it's like I wonder, is this one more of a policy? I don't know what your thoughts were on that when you looked at it, but that was my thinking about why I kept it in. But I'd be curious to know your thoughts about where it best lives and how it could be made more or less specific depending on where it ends up.
So just talking about it now, I think I realized where that came from. I don't recall if it was the last meeting, but when we were talking about our multifamily zoning, and the goal was not to have large multifamily structures and was limiting them to small, separate buildings with few units. I think this is what that is also referring to here. So now that I'm looking at it, when I read it earlier, I was just trying to understand why it was specifically calling out the 4 units or less, but now I'm realizing that's because of how our zoning code, the multifamily was, I think, I want to say that was the R15, but I could be wrong about that. I'd have to,
That
have to
sounds
look.
familiar.
Which we're trying to move away, I thought, from that a little bit, but we still are wanting to kind of keep that small scale. So I guess it makes sense to keep that in there. Sorry.
No problem. So just to clarify, so the R15 zone, it does allow multifamily unit buildings up to 8 units per building. Unless you evenly distribute the units among 3 floors, you can go up to 12.
Okay. So it wasn't-
Where I could see this kind of coming into play is if we wanted to look at increasing the unit count for R7. So right now, we only allow for single family and duplex in the R7 zone. So maybe opening those R7 neighborhoods up to 4 unit multifamily structures. That could be a way that, aside from the PRD code that we're already doing, something we could implement.
Yeah, I was trying to think, do we need to specify? But again, maybe that would limit ourselves if we say through incentives, et cetera, or something like that. But at least I have an idea of what, where we were going with that.
You know, back to that fourplex in an R7. Yeah, there's some really nice looking projects out there. Would we want to make sure that the lot square footage, even though it's an R7, if you were gonna now go to a quad model, I don't think we'd want it on the smallest little parcels possible. That there needs to be maybe, okay, you got 2 quads in an R7, that'd give you 8, right? But the lot size has to meet some type of minimum. We don't want to get into again, you have to visualize what that product's going to look like at the end of the day. So just to throw that out there, that's definitely a viable tool. However, let's be careful what we're crafting here at the end of the day of what's actually going to be in these neighborhoods.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's a good comment. Yeah, so this is, Nicole, you're kind of thinking about this as separate from the PRD. So this would be kind of like within just the straight base R7 zone. I mean, I think this is often done with duplexes where you see like a minimum lot size for a duplex that's slightly different from a single family home, and that isn't always necessarily desirable, but there's some of it's like some codes say like, oh, you can have a duplex on a corner lot, or you can have a duplex if the lot size is over 9,000 square feet or something. So this would be kind of something similar to that. Is that kind of what you had in mind, Nicole?
Yeah, generally along those lines. And kind of the way I'm thinking this through is I don't want to just take on a bunch of different code amendments where we don't really need them, right? Just hearing back from the council's feedback and whatnot. So I want to see how the cottage housing discussion goes with them. And, we've worked in the PRD calculations as far as our deficit goes with the middle housing. And I can't recall what the number is now as far as the unit count for deficit, but
Well, it's about an 850 unit surplus in the moderate density category, which is largely a result of the PRD, and then the more affordable, like the 80% and below, is like a 780 or something unit deficit. So, and then you also have like 300 unit surplus of single family capacity as well. So, yeah, so that's where we're at.
So I know that we only have like 6 months to implement the codes, but I think it would be smart to kind of take it piece by piece. Let's see where the cottage housing goes. I want to plan ahead, make sure we have kind of a viable list that's like, okay, if this doesn't get us there, then we have some additional tools to work with. But yeah.
In light of that, I kind of like this as a policy because then it's not super specific, and it gives you a little bit of latitude to see where things go. And there's a couple of different things that you could do that could kind of be in this realm, right? cracking open in case your density incentive from the PRD and your cottage housing is not quite getting you there, you can go like, oh, okay, well, maybe we can crack open R7 and see if there's a lot size that works well, and then you can get really specific, but we're not getting super specific in the plan. What do you think about that?
It's these types of policies that I like that are purposefully vague, so we can work with it however we need to kind of massage it to get where we need to be.
Yeah, I'm just going to Tom's update sheet here. As far as the cottage housing issue, there was no meeting set with council yet. So that would definitely be something, Tom and Nicole, that you probably want to see if we can get that in front of them sooner. Because the housing element is probably one of the biggest elements we're going to need to spend the majority of time on. But according to Tom's update sheet, it doesn't look like it's on their calendar as of yet. Or I could be wrong, I'm just going by what was sent out. Because we have another meeting next week, and they
So
meet on the 25th.
at
Oh,
the
I'm sorry.
previous council meeting, Joe, they did get to see the housing element, and we got
Oh.
some initial feedback on
On the
that.
cottage, on the cottage clusters?
Oh, the cottage clusters? No, we're
I'm
intending
talking-
on
yeah,
bringing
I'm
that for a
talking
first
cottage.
read on the 28th.
Yeah, that was referencing specifically the cottage portion.
Sorry.
I do, but we're getting there, but, so try to make these quick. So promote residential development in commercial areas where combining such uses would promote the vitality and economic viability of the area. So are we thinking mixed use? And why don't we just say mixed use development, or is this, the staff anticipate there is a reason to specifically say residential development? Or again, is it too limiting to say mixed use? Because we kind of have this now, I feel like.
Yeah, that's why I kind of liked it as is.
Okay.
Because you do allow residential in like the mixed commercial zone and the CBD zone. I think saying residential development in commercial areas gives you a little bit of flexibility because it can either be just a straight residential development, or in the case of like the CBD, it's got to be mixed use, or there's some, you could do a tweak where, I don't remember whether this is the case now or not, but if it fronts on a non-commercial street, you can do straight residential. So then it's like, it's on a parcel that's commercial, but you've got a residential building on one side and then a commercial building fronting the commercial street. So there, different ways you could do it. So I liked that it was vague.
Okay. All right. And then just a comment, promote the development of live-work units. I believe we've tried to change that wording to work-live through the code. We've missed a couple spots, but
Okay.
I think it's referenced a couple times in here, and I missed the other one. It was further up, but probably a word search will grab that. But
Anywhere where it says live work should be converted to work live.
correct.
Okay.
And the TMCO, if I looked at the TMCO correctly, it already allows that. So we're just kind of reiterating that here. I mean, this is a fairly recent code change.
Yeah, I mean that language in there is related to the revisiting of that zone, and so that language may end up going away because
Okay.
it's just going to be kind of whatever it ends up being. I mean, I think as the TMCO is now, it does allow that. We just want to make sure that as we're revisiting that and whatever new designation that becomes, if there's changes to the use matrix or whatever, that is preserved.
Okay. All right. So, and then, let's see. Find it. Oh, on the next page down, under, at the top paragraph, undertake Oh, must be one further down. Yeah, undertake efforts to support maintenance and revitalization of older housing. We've already covered that in the policy. I guess this gets maybe a little bit more detailed, but it does seem kind of redundant to me unless there's like a proposal for something specific, in which case we don't want to get too specific. So this is where I was running into the issue of feeling like the actions were almost like just restating the policy and not really, maybe, I wasn't sure if they were really achieving the goal that we want them to have, so.
That's a good point. Thoughts from others? I mean, I think you're right that it doesn't seem markedly more specific other than the older housing.
Yeah.
And I'm actually not sure whether there is still what one might consider long-term decline in the older neighborhoods. Sometimes like back in 2020 and 2021 when everybody bought 30 cans of paint and repainted their house and stuff, some of that stuff might have gotten fixed, but there might be something else there. I don't know. So.
Just thinking through this a little bit more on the future potential pathways for implementing something like this, sorry. So with maintenance and revitalization of things, I'm thinking through, our community development grant that we've issued for businesses in the downtown to kind of spruce up their building fronts. And there's in that case, it was a little bit broad criteria, right? So it's like, okay, you could do a paint job, you could do awnings, whatever, but it should be something to beautify the frontage. In this case, what projects would take precedence is probably things that are falling apart more and would, they're older houses that really need the work, right? So the worse off, the higher priority. So that's just something I'm thinking about and thinking through how this maybe is worded. It's like maybe older housing. Do we need to look at broadening that a little bit? Because it's like older housing, maybe you've had some renovations done. Yes, my house was built in 1913, but I've done some things in that time. And, I don't know. I'm just thinking through like how we would maybe go after supporting this in the future.
I would recommend talk to Cassandra. I wish she was here, but she lives in a historical house here in the city, and her husband's a contractor, and I would be curious to know if obtaining permits for whatever is complicated significantly by having such a 100-year-old plus house. I personally can't speak to it, but I bet she could maybe give you some ideas if that's an issue.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
we don't have a historic review committee where you have different jurisdictions that you need somebody else's permission to modify an awning or whatever. And looking at how this is written, I have no idea how you would even be able to do this. I mean, support maintenance. I mean, there's so many different folks that live in town that they have people on fixed incomes. You have newer families. You got people that really don't care how their 1920s house looks like. So I have no idea how you would do something like this outside of, it's more on the enforcement side if things are falling apart. Do you do it that way? I don't know. This is a pretty open-ended area here.
And another thing that's coming to mind for me, it was an earlier meeting that I attended, and we were talking about trying to put housing in the central business district on the second story and how difficult that was to get permits because of the building itself. So I don't know if that could possibly be related to this as well.
I was going to suggest that perhaps the language could be changed. Instead of saying to reduce the long-term decline, perhaps some language in there to support, I don't know, older neighborhoods or I don't know if we have long-term decline necessarily, but we do have older neighborhoods and some homes, and those older neighborhoods do need some TLC, but they're not necessarily going to go away.
Maybe preserve.
Possibly, yeah. And another thought I had is that to be on the historic register, your home has to be at least 50 years old, and that's now 1975. So, yeah. And that
That's a
changes,
scary
of course,
thought.
every year, so I'm glad I'm sitting down.
Yeah, and I will mention, we do have one property on the historic registry for the city of Sedro-Woolley. The Planning Commission acted as the Historic Preservation Committee for that. And so, in talking with that applicant later down the line, they shared with me some specific hoops that they had to jump through to revitalize the place. The house was the original Skagit Valley Hospital, the first hospital in Skagit Valley. It was very interesting, but very old, and you would think, it has had many revitalizations since whenever it was built. I can't remember, but yeah, they're very specific. It needs to be pretty much an exact replica of what was originally done, like within a very narrow margin of flexibility there. So it does get expensive.
I'm thinking about this some more too. Some of these older homes, older neighborhoods also could help supports the diversity of housing types and household types and that sort of thing that we'd mentioned in some of the other policies. I kind of like the idea of having this in here still, but perhaps rewording it. I'm not sure what the term is. Maybe bring it up to date a little bit more.
We'll park this one. Park this one as well for some more internal discussion.
And then the last one, which was really just kind of tagging on this, was the code enforcement thing, and thinking if we have a maintenance, thing in place, that would obviously be very helpful for code enforcement to say, hey, there is a resource out there if you don't have the ability to, maintain your older home. And I don't know, I guess, again, we're not getting that specific here. So what I kind of got caught up in when I was going through this is going, these are action items. Do we need to be more specific? But it sounds like, talking through this, that this is fine and this is the right level for this. And if we're comfortable leaving these action items and not rolling them into the policies they're kind of under, then I'm fine with that. I just kind of wanted to think through it and go, what are we trying to accomplish here that we're not already accomplishing with the more general policy? So,
Right. We don't want to be duplicative.
So.
Yeah, good.
Did you get through your list okay? Good. Well, that was very educational. Sorry, what? Oh. Do you have your hand up, Commissioner Fatisi? Nope.
Sorry, I don't believe so, no. I'm fine.
You're good?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's 8:49. What do you say we end that discussion and
Thank you.
talk about, thank you very much, Matt, for all that, and thanks for the note-taking, and thank you for all your good points. And we can entertain adjournment now, if there's no further discussion. Anyone in favor of adjourning? Motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
That's the one. Commissioner Fatizzi, a first.
Second.
Need a second?
Commissioner Jasper, second. All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
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 Oh, I don't count. All those,
We'll find that out yet.
Your vote matters,
count.
right? Someone said
we
that.
are adjourned, 8:49. Thank you.
Thank you for your help.
Thank you.
See everybody later. Thank you.
There is no apologies needed, Danielle. That was